I'd like to call the meeting to order, if we could, please. Thank you for everybody attending and those who are online. We do have present today our town manager, Cliff Gravier, our assistant town manager, Terry Tiemann, our town clerk, Raylene Menominee, and our town IT director, Will Wharton. We also have 4 members of our Stormwater and Flood Committee present. We are missing a couple, and one we will be missing and will be certainly missed, Jack Gordon, who has been with us since the very beginning. What was it? We formed this committee 4 years ago, I want to say, maybe 5 years ago. He's been with us since the very beginning. He had to turn in his resignation from not only this committee, but others that he was on due to medical reasons. So we will miss Jack for sure. We're also missing Matt Kirks and John Russell. Both of them had issues come up at the last minute. So, okay, I'd like to, do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion to approve the minutes of our October 3rd, 2024 meeting.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Seconded.
Okay, those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. We're going to move right into our presentation. Kathy Potter, the Denerick Delaware National Flood Insurance Program Coordinator, is here to give us a presentation today. The program is managed by FEMA and offers flood insurance to properties with significant flood risk. It also promotes the reduction of flood risk through adoption of floodplain management standards. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Kathy.
Thank you. As Ron said, my name is Kathy Potter. I'm with Denerick's Division of Watershed Stewardship. This is just a picture of showing you what we don't want to see. A beach with
Kathy?
no dune.
Could you pull the microphone down to you and speak a little?
Is that better?
You hear?
Thank you.
Okay. Good. We're good.
Thank you. So we're going to discuss what is the NFIP, what is floodplain management, higher standards, flood insurance. I'll tell you first, this PDF is available. So if you are worried about taking notes, don't worry, everything's going to be available for you. Mitigation, which is we want to prevent things and make them not so bad, and floodplain mapping and the Delaware floodplaining tool. So NFIP, you'll hear that acronym a lot, National Flood Insurance Program. Again, it was started by FEMA from 1968 from the National Flood Insurance Act, and it offers flood insurance to properties with significant risk, but also anybody who wants it, because where it rains, it floods. And the program also promotes the reduction of flood risk through adoption of local ordinances that communities agree on. And the program is managed by FEMA, but they delegate to the states, such as myself, to help ensure communities are abiding by what they say they're going to do in exchange for the nice discounts. Here are some FEMA flood zones. I don't expect you to read all these, I'm not going to lie. SFHA, you'll see that acronym a lot. It sounds like ceviche, but it stands for Special Flood Hazard Area. Those are areas where you are more likely than not to have flooding. And flooding is not only coastal, there is such a thing as nuisance flooding. There's sunny day flooding. I'm sure you've seen it down here on high tide. And we have areas outside of the SFHA, which still do get flooded. They're just not as likely percentage-wise. But the A zone, the AE, and the VE, V is especially important because that's where you're going to have wave action. The V stands for velocity. So we want to make sure the velocity of the waves doesn't cause more damage. So floodplain management requirements, CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, everything that the federal government does has to be in a Code of Federal Regulations, and everything has to be promulgated and accepted before it can be made into a law. So the 44 CFR Part 60.3 is where most of your floodplain requirements are. And it outlines the criteria for the flood-prone areas, your minimum standards for participating in the NFIP, and it tells you what communities must adopt and enforce that meet the minimum NFIP requirements. It's always better to go above. And the communities have the right to adopt higher standards. If you know in your area, if you go up another 12 inches and you're going to prevent $100,000 of damage, ounce of prevention is worth many thousands of dollars of cure. Delaware does have a model flood ordinance. Now, all the communities in Delaware that are part of the NFIP already have their own ordinances, but the state does have a model ordinance. So it's just kind of something they initially copied from and just tweaked it to their own communities, because every community in the NFIP says, this is what we want to do for our community. As a minimum, it meets the NFIP requirements, but lots of communities want to go a little bit higher, do a little bit better. Susan Frederick does a wonderful job, by the way. So this is a standalone model ordinance. There are more requirements the more zones you have. Your coastal community, if you were inland all the way and only had some rivers going through, you might not need all of the requirements that are in it. You don't have to go above for certain things. But it's written as a regulatory requirement for your community. It's not something that anyone else writes, and your community members are the ones that say, okay, we're going to comply with these. We like them. Most communities have to have a vote before they can adopt an ordinance or requirement. Some of you might be old enough to remember Schoolhouse Rock. And one of their little skits was the little bill saying, somebody said there ought to be a law. And in the skit, they were talking about the school bus stopping. But every law that's in Delaware is because someone requested it. If you look at your mini blinds in your home, you can't get a mini blind anymore with a string. That's in your private home. But someone requested to the government that they ban those strings because of safety, children getting injured and trapped and choked by those. So that's just an example of something small, but it's because a citizen requested it. So every law you have on your books is because someone requested it. You didn't just make it up to be mean to a property owner. So you're going to have the flood ordinance, you're going to have your language, and if you want to deal with higher standards, it's always good to be better prepared for when flooding does happen. Here is some post-storm damage, and it's pretty graphic. Somebody was definitely not able to inhabit this house after it happened. This was in Kitts Hummock, and it was destroyed by the Mother's Day storm in 2008. The storm was just a nor'easter, not a hurricane. And it took over 4 years for that property owner to recover and rebuild. 4 years. But they're pretty good now, because if you look, their first floor is completely open. The waves are going to go right through. That's part of the reason why you want to prohibit living space on the bottom floor. You don't want someone to be sleeping and then caught when the flooding happens and then you lose a life. That's the priority, is to watch out for, to protect human lives. Higher standards. You'll hear me say that a lot. Higher standards are established that go above the minimum requirements. And again, it's something the community says we want to do. We want to be a little bit more protective of our community. We want to make sure we can get back to normal as quickly as possible, which is why you want to have higher standards. So you can go a little bit further than what the minimum requirements are. The community officials, which are generally a council, town council, mayor, they're the ones who establish those, and then it's up to the employees to ensure those requirements are being met. It's a lot of extra work. But again, the more restrictive requirements are encouraged, because it's all about protecting human health and property. Communities that exceed the minimum requirements can become part of the community rating system, which gives you a discount on flood insurance. And that extends also to people who have flood insurance on just the contents, because renters can get flood insurance to cover just the contents of the properties. The higher standards result in less time recovering from a flood event. Businesses reopen sooner, people get back to their normal lives quicker. You don't want to have downtime of 4 years like someone did on that home. Why would you want to incorporate the higher standards? Again, you want to get back to normal life, normal as you know it, quicker. There's also, you want to reduce the flood damage to personal property. Your car might get damaged, but you really don't want your home, your bedroom, your living room, your kitchen to be completely destroyed. And then you want to reduce damage to the environment and to the infrastructure. The extra work it takes for a community to process damage. If you had a huge hurricane come through here, you probably wouldn't have the manpower to do everything that's required to get the properties evaluated, get the permits processed. Because disaster or not, you cannot skip the permitting process, period. So it's good to have sunshine days evaluation to make sure you come up with a procedure that's transparent, which again, kudos to Susan Frederick. Her, some of her documents are what we refer to other communities as excellent. Feel free to copy what they've done, put your own town name in, because it's fantastic. But by getting these procedures out before the disaster, it's much better for the community to know. And also you want to reduce the hardship. It's a real mental challenge for people to be displaced from their home, children and adults, and you want the community to rally together. And you don't want it to kind of be exacerbated and drug out. You want the community to come together and not face the mental struggles that result from having a flood. Some types of higher standards. Freeboard. That is the space above the base flood elevation, BFE. That's a very common an acronym also. And the freeboard, the higher the freeboard, the safer that dwelling is. And FEMA has documents to show that if you want to raise a new construction just 12 inches, that's going to be about $12,000. But if you were to have that same 12 inches flooded, it's going to be over $25,000 in damage, because you're going to have then your flooring, your insulation, your sheetrock. Then you got to worry about mold. It's Delaware. So freeboard, the higher the better. Cumulative substantial damage / substantial improvement. If you have a property that is, let's say it's built in the 60s, so it's not necessarily in your current code. If you allow them to make small changes to where they avoid the 50% cutoff, which is what the NFIP says, if you're doing improvements or repairs that meet or exceed 50% of the value of the home, not the land, just the home, then you have to come into compliance with current requirements. If you have somebody who's going to do 10% this year, 20% this year, 15% the next year, it's kind of skirting around that 50%, and it's making that property less resilient. And it's kind of a way, I don't want to say it's squirming around regulations, but if you have the cumulative totals for that property, you can make sure it doesn't just keep skating by, meeting just the minimum requirements to be livable. Accessibility. Again, if you want to elevate a roadway, if you have one road that goes into a neighborhood, that's your only method of egress. only method for emergency vehicles. You want to make sure that road is safe. Ideally, maybe get a second road. But you want to make sure it's safe for vehicles to get in and out in cases of emergency. The floodway setback requirement. You want to protect the carrying capacity by ensuring you have the buffers you need and making sure you have the space available for the water to flow. If people have things in the way of the flow of water, that's going to cause more damage, and that those items in the flood path are potentially going to become debris, which makes a problem later because the debris is going to crash into something. Flood elevation rise. Climate change is real. That's all I'll say about that. But you also want to make sure other projects are not going to negatively impact something else. You have to kind of look 15, 20 years down the road. I know a lot of residents want to stay here more than 15, 20 years. They want to be here for a lifetime and pass it on. You want to make sure that home is resilient so they can have it for their offspring and their family and friends for many years to come. Coastal A zones. It's an important area, and you have to have new construction in the A zone meet the VE standards. Again, in a VE area, you cannot have living space on the first floor. So if you see a property that has windows and sheetrock and electric on the wall on the first floor in the V zone, you have a problem because the requirements in the V zone are much higher, and it's all done for safety because you're going to have greater chance of having a wave action come blow your property out. You're going to have your walls go flying off somewhere into someone else's living room, breaking their windows, causing damage to their property, all because you had something that was a barrier to the water. That's why you want it wide open as you can. So again, A zone meeting the V zone requirements. Freeboard. Again, this is a really nice graphic that shows you what the freeboard is, and you see where the home is, the bottom of the lowest horizontal structure member, the bottom of the home that provides the structure to the home. And you see where the wave is, and the wave is always going to be higher than the base flood elevation. That's why the wave action is calculated in the V zones. Hopefully this picture shows up better when you look at it a little bit closer. But having a freeboard is the easiest way to protect a property. Just raise it up. That's all it is. Having that wide open space underneath gives a clear path for the water to go and to dissipate the velocity that it has. And it's a matter of safety. You can get to the home more easily when something does happen. Not if, but when something does happen. Especially when you're that close and you have waves underneath your home, as depicted in the picture. And the freeboard also compensates for what might come along later. Who would have ever expected a hurricane? I live in Dover, and who would have ever expected a hurricane or tornado to go ripping through Middletown? Went through Camden. Just Mother Nature's in control. So, and with climate change, we're going to have more things that are going to be a little bit more severe than what we have been having. Excuse me. And again, freeboard is extremely cost effective, especially when you are under construction. Cheaper to do it then than raise a house later. I hope you can see in the pictures. This foundation is completely cracked off, and this one's fine. That's what's pointing out, because the one home was not elevated. The one next to it was, and you can just see the crumbling facade, but you now have the damage to the structural foundation. Coastal A zones. The LIMWA line, limit of moderate wave action, is on the DNREC flood planning tool, which I'll discuss later. So you kind of want to know where that is, but your coastal A zones are where you're going to have, you're the closest to the water source on the ocean side. But having the zone VE standards for the coastal A zones are, again, the pilings, having the home anchored so it doesn't just kind of fall off of the pilings. Free of obstruction is why you have it on the pilings. Cars, people can move the cars if there's something happening or if you expect a storm. Cars can be moved. If people have things in a little storage, that's hopefully already built to withstand. Everything else should be wide open. Let that water flow through. No structural fill. That is never going to be as strong as the natural earth is. But these, again, the note is they're still subject to the wave action. This is a good graphic to show you where the different zones are and what can be impacted by the wave. Mother Nature's not going to follow a straight line, and a wave could change direction, especially when it runs into something. There have been studies have shown if you have two homes and a wave comes in between, it's going to impact each, but everybody else is still going to feel that wave action once it goes through those homes. It's going to be diverted a little bit when it goes around something. You're just changing the direction of the flow. But this shows in here the 100-year still water elevation, and then the wave is the blue line. So that's why you have the VE zone, because you have the velocity of the waves. The AE zone, you still have a wave. Coastal AE. Regular AE, you still have at least 1.5 feet. And X, very unlikely compared to that distance. This is Kit's Hummock. And you have to make sure people are following the requirements of the town. If you just put the ordinance out, it says it's up to you to read it, it's not going to get followed. Just like you tell people to put your trash can out, pull it back in after a day or two. Take down your Christmas decorations within 2 months or something like that. You have to make sure people know it and follow it. But this is an example. It's not that far away.
Kathy, what storm is that?
I don't know.
Okay.
And it's not necessarily even a named storm. Could have just been a nor'easter that came through. But that just kind of shows you the damage that can be done. That's a few feet of water.
Yeah.
Oops, I didn't even. So, but the floodplain management, it lowers the cost to the citizens, the property owners, property renters. If you have a good management of the floodplain for your community, it's going to reduce the need for, and this says expensive drainage solutions. That's mitigation. If you have one area right, it's going to positively impact the next. It's a domino effect. You don't want to do just one expensive thing here, but not forgetting where it is upstream. And also creates more resilient communities. You can recover quicker. That's what we talked about for the higher standards. More resilient, you don't have to worry as much about every time a storm comes through, every time there's a nor'easter. Is this one going to be as bad or not as the 5 before you? Decreases recovery time, which is the same as being more resilient. You can bounce back better, bounce back quicker. And the enforcement of the regulation also helps avoid NFIP probation. What surprised me personally to find out was if you have property owners who have created living spaces on their first floor, and that goes in violation of your ordinance, and let's say there's a hurricane that comes through, FEMA comes along, they're doing inspections, and they see a lot of homes that have first floor living spaces, they're not going to ding the homeowner, they're going to ding the community, because it's up to the community to enforce their own rules. I thought, wow, you don't control the property owner. I knew that. There's going to be people who you will tell them and they'll have on their plans, no, it's just storage and car parking. A couple years go by without you knowing, things get added on, things get modified inside. I mean, it has happened. So it's kind of a shame that the community has to kind of be responsible for that, but you're responsible for the community. That's the whole point. You're making the rules, and you want to make sure people follow the rules fairly. And in some communities, it's really kind of nice. You don't have to worry about, in some communities, going out to do proactive inspections because you have enough eyes watching the neighbors. And you're going to have somebody call in and say, well, they're not doing this. I had to do this. I had to take these extra steps, but they're not.
All right.
It happens.
Question, when you say living space, would that include like an office?
Is there what?
An office on the first floor, would that be a living space, or are you talking about bedrooms and things?
In the V zone, yes, that would be considered living space. You have to have breakaway walls. You cannot have utilities on those walls. They can only be on the poles that are the support ones.
Yep.
It's good to limit that size also. If you have a home that's elevated, people want to have storage underneath. They might want to have, beach stuff locked up, secured. But if the entire storage, wink, wink, is the whole downstairs, then you're kind of inviting that to be converted into living space. And I don't know if a lot of you remember Hurricane Katrina coming through New Orleans, how many people died in their beds because they did not hear or feel the flood coming in. Now, that was extreme, I will say. But there are people who didn't know or feel the water coming in. Just kind of woke up and too late by then. So that's the whole point of making sure that it's not living space. It doesn't turn into a man cave or the game room, because then you are inviting the nuisance. We've found people who have put bathrooms on the first floor. You can't do that, period, if you're in a V zone, because that's, again, you can't have a bathroom there. The only thing you're supposed to have on the bottom floor for a V zone is storage. There used to be a limit of 299 square feet for storage, but FEMA eliminated that. They did some other tweaks, but you don't want to see a plan in the V zone where somebody's got walls and windows and, storage that goes the entire size. If you see sheetrock, it's already a problem, and I've seen that in some communities.
What's probation?
Probation is something that FEMA determines. If FEMA says, all right, you're on probation, you're going to have policy owners get a fee added on to all of their policies while you're on probation. Depends what you're on probation for, because FEMA has the authority to do that, not me. But probation's only after they've tried to work with you, or if they've seen egregious problems, and especially long-term or ongoing project problems, because they want to make you understand if you allow things to continue, if you allow a variance here and there, then, because having a variance is opening the floodgates. Once you do it for one, everybody's going to want it, and then you're just defeating the purpose of the requirements.
So it's typically a financial penalty?
The probation?
Yes.
Yes, but also part of the being in the NFIP, part of the thing you get out of it as a community is money. If there's a presidentially declared disaster, you get money available to you. And if there is extra funds needed, like let's say you need to subcontract out to inspectors to go look at areas that have been hit, you're not gonna have the money right away, but FEMA can get that to you very quickly, and you can have the money to hire the subcontractors to go out and help. Flood insurance. A few years ago, before I started with this program, the way the insurance was calculated was changed. It's called the NFIP pricing approach. If you're a little bit older, you might remember Risk Rating 2.0. That predates me, but some of you have been in this more than me. I've been with Denrick actually 25 years, but I've only been in this division for the past year and a half. So learning new stuff. So the NFIP, the whole point of making the changes was to equalize what people were paying. Because it used to be where someone 1 block away from the ocean was paying the same rate as someone 1 mile away. Kind of didn't seem fair. So right now, the risk rating is based on the flood frequency, the source and type, because again, it could be a river, it could be the ocean, it could be a pond that is connected somehow tidal. So there's lots of sources. Distance to the source and the size of the water source. Building characteristics, such as the first floor height, your elevation. Do you have a slab foundation? Do you have a basement, crawl space? And then the cost of what it would be to rebuild the structure. Because what a lot of people forget, for flood insurance, it's only insuring the structure, not the land, because the land's not going to go away. You're going to have that. And one of the things I was a little surprised, but kind of in a good way to hear when Susan and I spoke before, they said a lot of people would rather just tear down and rebuild rather than try and fix it. That's better because they're going to be even more resilient if they're building new versus trying to repair something, because the cost of elevation might be very close to cost of building new, and they might want to build bigger, which means more taxes. But the policies are to a person. So again, if you're a renter, you could have your contents covered. And that might be good if you're a long-term renter and you're right on the beach, you're there for a year, you want to make sure your stuff is covered. You're not worried so much about the building because you're renting it. So firms, flood insurance rate map, and the elevation certificates are no longer used to calculate the insurance. I can guarantee you have citizens calling all the time asking for an elevation certificate. Not every property has one. They're still extremely valuable to have, very convenient to have, but for the pricing approach, it's not required anymore. It used to be. So note, this is why it's big and red and it's the only thing on there. More than 40% of claims are outside of the SFHA. So you might be in an X area and you can still get flooded. One thing to keep in mind is your homeowner's insurance isn't going to cover the damage if that water's been outside. So it might be where someone's debris broke a window in your home, you have rain coming in, your homeowner's is going to say, nope, that was outside. Go to your flood insurance. Yeah. And one thing to note also, if you have flood insurance, if you're selling your property, it's a benefit to let the new buyer take over your policy, because they'll actually get a cheaper rate than if they got their own. Because there are waiting periods for flood insurance, except when you are going to closing and you are buying something. Not always the same thing. So otherwise, you have to wait 30 days. That's to prevent people from saying, oh, flood's coming in 2 days. Let me get flood insurance. Doesn't work that way. Mitigation. And this is an example of where you get information out. If you set up a table in a local home repair store. So hazard mitigation is any sustainable action that reduces or eliminates the long-term risk to people and property from future disasters. So ounce of prevention worth many thousands of dollars of cure. So tiny print, I'm sorry. The hazard mitigation assistant grants, it's not something that an individual homeowner generally applies for. That's something the community will apply for. And in Delaware, DEMA, Delaware Emergency Management Agency, handles and processes almost all the grants. So when I get a phone call about a grant, and there's multiple ones available, there's 3 listed here, I generally have to refer you to our state hazard mitigation officer, SHMO, SHMO, and that person will get you the paperwork and tell you what some of the requirements are. And if you want a grant, let me tell you, it's going to be a minimum of 1 year. So it's good to look ahead at what you might be able to use to prevent something in the future. Plan now while the sun is shining. So there's a flood mitigation assistance. There's building resilient infrastructure and communities, BRIC, excuse me, and hazard mitigation assistant grant program. A lot of acronyms. There's more information because some of these are before. I actually thought that was someone's phone. I thought it was someone's phone ringing. So again, 2 of these are pre-disaster and one's post-disaster. So if you have the time now and you can kind of plan, pre-disaster is always better.
What sort of projects would that be? A pre-disaster?
Let's say you wanted to put in a bioswale, or if you wanted to put in a pervious surface instead of an impervious surface. You wanted, because there are certain roads where the water can filtrate through.
Sure.
And if you want to put in a sidewalk where you've got not solid concrete, but a surface, again, where the water can flow through. If you have a property that you know is a problem site, it frequently gets flooded out. If it's a repetitive loss property, you might want to buy that property out. I have some pictures that show one community did that, and they turned that home into a park. Where that home was, which flooded frequently, they turned it into a park. Haven't had any problems since then.
And that was able to get a grant money to help with that?
You'd have to look at the different grants and the requirements for each one and the qualifications.
Okay.
Because there's different types, so they all have their own requirements. And again, it's not a short process at all. Most of the ones that I've seen are minimum 2 years. That's why I said it's always going to be more than 1 year to find out if you have it. There's a lot of information you have to gather. And some people have to spend money. Some communities have to spend money to study their idea. So when they apply for the grant, they say, this is our proof that this can work.
Okay, thank you.
Mitigation strategies. Installation of engineered flood vents. I don't know how many of you have or know what a flood vent is, but they are sized for a specific reason and in a specific location to help with the velocity of just help the water flow through. Elevate the structure, relocate the structure, because, you know, the beach was a little bit bigger many years ago. So you have homes that are a little close to the water right now. Buy out and removing the structure. Adoption of hazard-resistant building codes, because there are materials you can get that are flood-resistant. And then participation in the community resource program. So this is a flood vent. Flood vents are designed to be just working on their own. You don't need someone to manually do anything. They're a passive way of letting the water flow through. And if you have water stuck underneath your house, it's going to come up through your basement and crack your floor, crack your foundation. So you could retrofit or install these, and again, they're sized a certain way based on the area that is the bottom of the floor, like the crawl space that you're covering. It has to be 1 inch of flood vent for every 100 square inch of surface area that it's protecting from. Van Wyck Island, elevating a home. That's a pretty tall area. Big Stone Beach, before and after. And again, it's not a short process to elevate a home. Because one thing to keep in mind is this project would need a building permit, but also floodplain permit. Those are two different things. You might have your floodplain requirements incorporated into the building permit, but as an FIP community, you have to count that permit separately, the floodplain permit, because not every building permit needs a floodplain permit. If you're not in the SFHA, then you don't need a floodplain permit. Again, that's a little bit of extra work for your community.
Where's Big Stone Beach located?
Kind of, I would say south of Milford.
It must be a small beach. I've never heard of it before.
There's not a lot of people on there either. And again, one of the things for grants, like I said, they're designed to have a bigger impact. You want the community to benefit rather than one property owner. But again, it's not a task to be taken lightly to elevate. And this is the buyout that I was talking about. So that's what it used to be. That's the frequent flooding they had. Frequent flooding. Now it's a bocce court. It's a place where all the residents can come and kind of enjoy. And Bowers Beach isn't that big, so you have an area where you could have a gathering, share information. Good community bonding. But again, it didn't take a lot to relocate the house. And it wasn't just a matter of just removing the house. They did prepare the land some. They elevated the land. They added it a little bit to make it more resilient to when the rain would come in. But it's now called the Main Street Park. Building codes. Your community has them. Every community does, because you don't want somebody to build a home with 1x2s and press wood. So FEMA did a study, and they studied over a 20-year period communities and building codes and how much building codes saved the citizens, because it prevented damage and it saved lives. Though, I don't know how they could count how much the life is worth, but all they could really count was the property. But again, one of the major things is, if you want to locate your critical infrastructure services outside of the special flood hazard area. In some towns, that's really challenging because the whole town might be in the special flood hazard area, but you don't want to build your only firehouse on the ground level with no flood vents and no other ways of making the property safe. So the community rating system, which I called it the wrong name a couple slides ago, it's completely voluntary, but with the CRS, when you're a CRS community, your property owners get a bigger discount on their insurance. So that can be significant given the quantity of insurance policies that you have. Susan can probably tell you how many policies you have, just round number. And you figure each person saving, hypothetically, $50 per policy. Might not sound like a lot, but you add it up for the whole town, that is a lot. But again, part of being CRS is you are held to a higher standard. You take more steps, take better steps to make your community resilient and something kind of others should aspire to be, but just me. So, but again, the CRS classifications, there's extra steps to do for it. Bethany is in it. So interestingly enough, 10 is the lowest rating, 1 is the highest. So, Terry, do you know what the CRS is for here? Pardon me? 8, okay. So again, that's a couple levels up. So it's a good thing for the community residents to know that they're getting that discount, and to know that they should be proud of the community for taking the extra work and extra steps to make the community more resilient. So your risk. Now, FEMA has gone away from the 1 in 100-year flood, 1 in 500-year flood, because people erroneously think, oh, there was a flood 2 years ago, I'm good for the next 98 years. I'm good for the next 498 years. Oh my gosh, look at Florida. Who would have thought? Some people have seen 500-year floods twice in a year. Again, climate change. So, but what FEMA's doing is they're breaking the risk down as to what's your percentage during a 30-year mortgage? What's your percentage of having a flood while you have a mortgage on that property? Because what some people do is when they pay the mortgage off, they cancel the flood insurance. And I was saying earlier, if you have flood insurance, you go to sell your property, that's a benefit because a new buyer can take over that policy. But if you've dropped your flood insurance, and again, there's a 30-day waiting period if you want to get it again. If you know there's a storm coming, you're kind of too late. You're already behind the 8 ball. But this graph shows the relationship between flood occurrence intervals and the probability of an event occurring during a 30-year period. But the flood risk is not static. It's not going to follow the perfect graph. Now, Delaware flood planning tool. one of the things I enjoy the most talking about. There's the web address highlighted in yellow, and you can put your address in it. This box here, you type your address in. As soon as you start typing in, like your house number, it'll start populating it with addresses in Delaware. Click yours, and it'll show you information about your property. Nope. I thought I had a sample on the next slide. But it'll tell you also if there's a BFE, what your flood zone is. Keep in mind, you might have multiple flood zones on the same property. That is not unheard of. The Delaware Flood Planning Tool pulls its mapping information from the FEMA Mapping Center. So that's why it's very important for a community when they do annexations or any changes to property. They're required to let FEMA know. Any NFIP communities are required to let FEMA know within 30 days of that change. So FEMA maps are updated, and then our maps are updated. But you want to know, especially if you are interested in buying a property, you want to move somewhere, you want to look at not necessarily a pattern, but you want to see if this group, this neighborhood, is in the whole flood zone in the SFHA, and this other one adjacent is not. The other one might be a little bit more elevated. So, but it is location specific. There are layers. There is the DENREC no-build line. There's the lien wall line, and there's municipal boundaries, which is why it's important when the boundaries change that you notify the FEMA Map Center. So this is, the blue box is the DENREC office on Pilot Town Road. The blue shows the special flood hazard area, and it's right on the water. It's completely in the special flood hazard area. So VE 10 is your base flood elevation, 13, 11, AE 9. So it gives you a lot of information, and that's just a still picture. There's another little box that is open, but I closed it for the picture, where the red dot is. It'll tell you, it'll break out a little box with the tax parcel information too. A new tool is iAdapt. That was recently launched by Water Conservation, I believe. There's the address on there. You put in your particular property address, whether your home, your business, something you're looking to buy, and it goes through more than just flooding. It asks a lot of questions about your particular property, and it gives you suggestions on how to mitigate your property, make it a little bit more resilient, not only to flooding. It covers a lot of hazards. Key takeaways. You have to educate your citizens. They need to know what the risks are, and they need to know what tools are already available. Encourage flood insurance, even outside the SFHA, because where it rains, it floods, period. Flood insurance alone is not going to save you. Higher standards will definitely help you. Buildings that are 18 inches above the BFE have a much reduced chance of being severely damaged. Discourage construction fill in the flood fringe. Oof. Like I said, it'll never be compacted the same. Locate your critical facilities outside of the high-risk areas. Discourage development within the floodplain, and mitigate your known issues. This is the FEMA website, www.floodsmart.gov. I think I've gone a little long, but here's my contact information. If you have any questions, you're welcome to email me. Name and email are on there. Any questions?
Any questions from the audience or anything? Thank you, Kathy.
Peanut
That was
gallery is
a
fun.
very extensive, and you must have done very thorough, because there's no question. Well, we did have a few questions as we were going
It
through.
is a lot of information. That's why it's available in PDF to look at it later. There's certainly nothing wrong with thinking of something later. But interestingly enough, your first point of contact should always be your community. And for you, your first point of contact is actually Susan Frederick, because she is your floodplain manager. So she is well aware of what your community requirements are, and essentially, she's kind of the one in charge. She's in charge of implementing it, in charge of managing it. So when I have people call and ask me questions about a particular community, my first question is always, have you called your community floodplain manager? Because every community has different rules. They all have a minimum, but they can go above in different ways. So I don't know every single community's rules. That's why you look online too.
Thank you very much.
And Will, I've turned it off.
Yep, and, you know, we'd love for you to stay the rest of the meeting. We got a few more things to go through, but it's up to you. I mean, you can certainly.
No, I actually have to go, but thank you for the invite. I've enjoyed talking to everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have Kathy's presentation, so if anybody would like a copy, I can forward that on to anybody. If anybody's online, please email into the town at admin@townofbethanybeach.com. Okay, moving on to our next item. Chip, you're going to give us a little summary on the resilience workshop that took place in November down in South Bethany. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ron. It was great to see all the communities get together and talk about resiliency along our coast. We had South Bethany as the host, Bethany Beach, Dewey Beach, Henlopen Acres, Lewes, and Rehoboth Beach. We had about 20 people there. They were either elected officials or senior staff, and the whole idea was to talk about resilience challenges with climate change, sea level rise, and of course our shared flat landscape with nowhere for water to go. So we all have the same problem. So it's great that we got together to talk about that. I'm just going to hit a couple quick highlights. I have more notes if people want them. See me after the meeting and I'll get your email and send them to you. Resiliency work is really important, and collaborating among the towns, I think everybody there agreed would be a good way to go. And not just share information, but also see if there are opportunities, policy-wise, legal-wise, that we can share expertise, staff, facilities, and equipment even in some cases. If some town needs some help, others jump in, and then sort of rotate how that works. Sea level rise, of course, is affecting our health and well-being as well as our investments here in our property. So some of the things that we talked about are how we're surrounded by development in our beach communities, the stuff we don't control. Sussex County controls it. So we need to focus more on Sussex County. We just had an election. We got 3 new people on the Sussex County Council. Several of them have been key supporters of looking at growth and environmental issues, so we're heartened by that. Focus on the code was one of the messages I got out of the workshop. If you can change codes to improve the requirements to protect wetlands, buffers, have good standards in place for how you fill and use impervious or pervious surfaces, all of those things little by little can help protect us all from some of the flood damages and certainly some of the nuisance flooding that we're all now living with. What I think is also important is we now have contacts up and down the coast, and I think we're going to take turns hosting workshops periodically so we can continue to share information. The presentation by Danielle Swallow from the Delaware Sea Grant organization was outstanding. A lot of information on that. It's available on the web, so I'm not going to repeat all of that here, but it's really important, she says, to plan for the future, do everything we can to protect ourselves, and she said one of the big issues she often faces, which doesn't surprise me, is that people object to doing anything to historic buildings, which are really important in our communities. But she tries to remind people that if you don't go ahead and flood-proof them or elevate them, even though that's a change in visual appearance or context, you're going to lose them. So you may as well do what you can to protect them so that you can continue to use them for educational purposes in the future. And then the last point on the workshop, and then I'll see if Ron has anything to add. Everybody's challenged by funds and staff. We all know our staff in our towns, they're small, they're stretched thin. During the beach season, we're overwhelmed by, 20, 30,000 guests and visitors, and even though we shrink back in the winter, there's hardly time to take a breath and recover, and then we're back at it again. So we've got to look for support from state and local governments. That's tough because we're now going to move into an era, I suspect, of perhaps 4 years where funding for some of these things is not going to be as high a priority as it has been in the past. I will mention very briefly that I did also attend a Navigating Growth Spotlight event at the Delaware Technical Community College a couple of days ago, which also was very interesting. Some of the same things came up. They had two panels, one developers, one more advocates for less development and environmental protection. They focused on a lot of the same things. Look at your codes, see what you can do in your communities to make requirements sufficiently stringent to protect yourselves. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ron. Thanks.
Thanks, Chip. One of the things we might note in the town is one of the historic building, which is owned by the town, the Dinker Irvin Cottage, was raised up, and I believe is out of the floodplain, has 18 inches of freeboard on it now. So many of the other ones in town are privately owned. I've seen some of them worked on, but you only have so much control. You worry about some, like Journey's End, for instance. It's such a historic one, but I don't know. It's a big one, and that'd be a heck of a job to do that one. So, moving on, I've got a couple of issues I wanted to touch base on, just kind of update everybody, because there are several moving targets out there, moving projects which are critical to us. One of them is the Water Resources Development Act of 2024, which has been championed by Senator Carper. And it has passed the Senate and the House, and I am told that it should be law by the end of the year. Of course, that's what I was told directly by Carper's office just before Thanksgiving. Hopefully that's the case. That would be wonderful. We know there's a new administration coming in. Who knows what the impact of that's going to be? But the Resources Development Act of 2024, if it gets totally approved, will reduce the local contribution for replenishment from 35% to 20%. That's a major, major, major step right there. And it also supports and authorizes flood control, navigation, and ecosystem restoration projects all through Delaware and across the country. So it has a lot of good items in it, and hopefully it will be passed by the end of the year. We shall see. The next one, the University of Delaware, the Sea Grant's recent economic study, Seaside to Statewide, was released in November. A real eye-opener, but I think it's nothing that we didn't already know, and but this kind of documents it and puts numbers to it. It clearly documents the economic contribution of the coastal region of Delaware to the entire state's economy. The state receives $820 million in tax revenues from coastal activities, 104,000 new jobs across Delaware, and that's across Delaware, not just here, are created as direct result of the coastal economy. And $8.3 billion in revenue is generated throughout the state as a result of the coastal economy. I think the coastal economy has become the landmark driver of Delaware's economy. If it's not ahead of agriculture, it's certainly right up there. So the last one I wanted to touch base on is the Delaware Shoreline Economic Study Workshop. Well, it's the It's Denrec is driving this. It's a Delaware Shoreline Economic Study. It's been working on for quite a while, and it's addressing beach replenishment and the possible sharing of costs of the beach communities in the replenishment activities. The last and final workshop was held in September the 26th. I was lucky enough to be there with Stan Mills from Rehoboth. It seems to be well programmed and moving. There were a lot of people, and I stress a lot, from who are not part of the study, but who had comments on it. I mean, Stan and I commented on the lack of consideration of the Sea Grant study. I think it really should be something that they take into consideration and address, but I don't see that happening. We also pointed out several inconsistencies that were in their report. We'll see if those are addressed. Who knows? But there was a lot of others that spoke up, including Todd Lawson and our Sussex County executive, and Tony Pratt, who I think a lot of people know is a longtime Delaware resiliency expert. He's been involved with Denrec in the past, and he's been in books, and he does current studies and helps right now with the Bay communities, supporting them in resiliency projects and some of their grant money. And he actually, I think, is going to be putting out a report questioning some of the activities of the Denrec study. So we shall see. That it's coming out. It's supposed to be coming out by the end of the year, but the end of the year is coming up quickly. We will see how things develop. And that's the extent of my report. Cliff, do you got a few things to add?
Mayor, just a couple of things.
Up.
Ron, I'm just curious, why would they not include it?
Why would they not include the?
Sea grant study, at least, is another source of information. I mean, it seems sort of the way they set that up originally was to be broad-based, thought-based, right? Just
Yeah.
it just seems.
Mayor?
Well, they don't seem to
And
be.
a theme that you wouldn't even consider it or try to factor in since it was already done.
When they initially began the DENREC study, one of the things everyone was told was that the DENREC study was not going to look at indirect benefits. They were only going to look at direct benefits. For instance, how does the community directly benefit? How does the oceanfront home directly benefit? The Sea Grant study is all about the indirect benefit that the whole region brings to Delaware's economy. During one of the Zoom meetings that DENREC had, they did sort of acquiesce later in the meeting, yes, that they would look at indirect benefit. They would look at how the replenishment benefited the county, but that was not what the initial group was told.
And it certainly didn't seem from the workshop like that was going to happen. No. So.
And I believe ACT lobbied at each meeting it attended to try to have them take that into consideration, but it wasn't, so.
Yeah. It seemed to be very structured, and they were reluctant to go outside the lines of their structure.
Yeah.
So. Would you
Mayor,
like to
so-
touch base on a few things?
Yes, sure. So the Loop Canal has becoming a much longer, slower process than we had all hoped. While our engineers continue to work on final design, efforts to work through permitting issues are in limbo, basically, on both our engineers' part and our part, as we try to work through some very basic issues with the state of Delaware. One of the issues that we have had is that it's taken us several months to schedule appointments with DENREC, and then follow-ups also took some time to schedule. But with that said, we're working, strategizing with our engineers to aggressively look at the permitting issue after the first of the year, and hope to have some progress in that area beginning in January. Our Loop Canal bulkhead project to preserve the living shoreline on the lake side of the Lake Bethany land spit and the loop side is far along. If we weren't faced with the heron breeding season, which begins March 1st and ends August 31st, and that land strip is a heron rookery, we probably would begin to work on that in the spring. But because of that season, we are going to be forced to probably begin the project after August 31st. But at that point in time, it will be fully well ready to go and funded. And
Great.
Mayor, that's all I have.
Question, do we have any idea who's going to run DENREC next year?
No idea.
No idea.
No idea.
There's a study group together. Todd Lawson is part of the study group,
Saw that.
but nothing, to my knowledge, nothing's been released to date as to who it will be.
Candidates,
I mean, there's some we would hope it would be, but
Yes.
we shall see, I guess. I'm going to fill in for Matt Kirks here just quickly. The Bethany homeowners helped the town fight flooding initiative with our pamphlet distribution and A-frames. We have been doing that since Thanksgiving, through the Thanksgiving Day holiday, and probably right on through Christmas. We will definitely be having it out there, and it is out there now. A lot have been distributed. Hopefully, homeowners will grab onto some of them and think about it and actually do something. So we shall see. You don't expect a whole lot, but if just 1, 2, 3, a few start doing something, it's worth the time and it's worth the money. So, discussing individual research flood studies. Bob Collins is going to have a little section here starting next meeting, which will be in early February, where he will discuss projects that he's involved with the Center for the Inland Bays. That includes a couple of living shorelines, but it also includes projects that are going on at James Farm, which Bob, I don't know whether anybody knew that or realized that, but Bob is the manager of James Farm, which is owned by the Center for the Inland Bays. So we are lucky to have him on this committee, and better watch out. He's probably going to start recruiting people for the late night charting of the movements of the horseshoe crab out there, which comes up in the spring, I believe. So that's all I've got tonight. Anybody else have any comments from the committee? I do. Okay. Well, you're not on the committee. I hadn't got to you yet.
I wanted to say something before you close the meeting. And I just wanted to clarify two things. The first is the DENREC study. When they released that about the possible sharing in the replenishment, that still has to go to the Delaware legislature for approval. That needs legislation. And the second thing I wanted to point out is the study that was updated by Delaware Sea Grant, the 2012 economic study. I just wanted to say that never would have happened but for Cliff Gravier. He pushed ACT to refund the study, to ask them to update it, and he also put Bethany Beach's money up front, so then the others contributed. And when they sent out the interim study, it really wasn't well done or well presented, and Cliff went back and showed them how to do it in a better way and what to include, and they did it. So I just wanted everyone to know that that study, as good as it is today, would not have occurred or been as good if it wasn't for Cliff. That's all.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Yes.
But putting up Bethany's money was so easy for me, so I just...
No, but thank you, Rosemary, for bringing that up, because Cliff does do innumerable things for us, and he's always got the right perspective, and he always knows how to approach it. and he's put us in a good position a lot of times. And it's not just Bethany, it's, it's the Act communities, it's all up and down the coast here. So we're lucky to have Cliff with us.
Thank you. And Bob has left some calendars for everybody, so.
Okay. Okay, anybody else got any comments? Well, thank you, everybody, for attending, and thank those online for listening to us. And do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
We got a good
Thank you
team
very
down
much.
there.
We can do it.
If anybody would like one of the short